Warning, the following program contains critical thinking, honest opinions, viewpoints on culture that may seem conservative, and a positive view on absolute detestable things such as marriage and children. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello to those of you who are just crazy enough to keep coming back and listening to me, and hello to those of you who might be listening for the first time. This is Subtle Rampage Podcast, and today, as you could probably tell by the title of the episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about censorship and how I recently got censored for talking about my perspective on something. And that something might happen to be a certain vaccine for a certain virus that kind of caused people to go a little bit crazy and shut down the world, you know? So, second week of February, I believe, is when I went on a different Christian conservative podcast for a bit of a roundtable discussion on a few topics. And that was the week of Chinese spy balloons and Project Veritas coming out with more information about Pfizer and a certain vaccine for a certain virus and some behind the scenes stuff going on with that. So it was kind of like a week chock full of like big news stories, I guess. So I went on there for a discussion. The podcast name is Forge and Anvil. I'll link them in the description if I remember to. But yeah, it was really fun. It was a great experience. It was a great conversation. It was the main host of the podcast and then one of his usual co-hosts, I believe. He's on for a lot of episodes. And then there was another guest besides myself, Larry Linton. He does his own podcast. I believe it's called Liberty, Leadership, and Lies. And I've listened to a couple episodes so far. It's just, it's interesting how many people are out there with varying voices, even in the conservative community, because you can find so many different experiences. Like, we might have like differing beliefs on certain issues, but that's just because we have completely different life experiences and completely different like tanks of knowledge in our brains. And so that was one of the things that I found interesting was when we were discussing Chinese spy balloons, okay, and all this stuff about like military and spying technology and stuff. Like he had a lot more input on that, obviously, because I don't know much about that, but this man was in the military for I think 30 years, maybe longer. And so he had a lot of insight as to the technology and the approaches that the military uses and all of that stuff. So I thought it was interesting. I'll link the episode if you want to check it out. But yeah. Anyways, this week, this last Monday, the Tennessee Conservative, the newspaper that I personally write for, put out an article on the episode that I did with Forge and Anvil. I promise I did not write this one. Okay, I didn't even bring it up. That would be kind of biased. But they wrote, in a recent episode of Forge and Anvil, constitutional conservative Larry Linton and the Tennessee Conservatives' own Adelia Kirchner, who joined the podcast to discuss Chinese spy balloons, Tennessee versus big tech, and other current topics in the news. Like the Tennessee Conservative, Forge and Anvil publishes their content on YouTube in addition to the free speech platform Rumble to reach the largest audience possible. When the group discussed the recent Project Veritas bombshell on Pfizer, YouTube took notice and deleted the entire episode, even though this topic is recent news and only a portion of the topics discussed on the show. This is just another case of Tennesseans being censored by big tech for expressing their conservative views. Over a year ago, YouTube censored and took down a Tennessee conservative video regarding election integrity concerns, and we still have an active community guideline strike on our account. The best chance the state has right now to combat censorship by big tech is with Representative Powers / Senator Watson's social media censorship prevention bill. But yeah, I just kind of find it a little bit amusing personally because I feel like how else can you look at this type of thing without getting like frustrated or angry? And I kind of don't like being an angry person. I've been an angry person and it's not really fun, but I can totally see why people who like are trying to make money or do make money off of what they do being genuinely frustrated or genuinely angry by being censored for stuff like that, for their conservative views, or for just bringing up things that are factual that do exist. It's kind of ridiculous, or it is completely ridiculous. I've kind of just decided, okay, that if YouTube or Twitter or these social media platforms in general that like to censor people, I've kind of decided that if they were human beings, um, I would just kind of deem them, like, insecure or jealous. Like, I think we should do a whole, like, therapy session, like, a whole psychological diagnosis on all the different, psychological disorders that these social media platforms would have if they were humans. Maybe that's really stupid. I'm sorry. But I just think it's funny. I'm like, if this was a person censoring people, like, just one person and it wasn't this giant entity, right? You'd be like, "Oh, well, they're just jealous of you," or, "Oh, well, they're just insecure." Because, I mean, it's literally like no no shade or anything, but I'm like, I'm not a big creator. I don't know how many followers Larry Linton has. He probably has a decent amount. He's been doing his podcast for a while, and he's also like run for office and stuff in Tennessee. And Forge and Anvil has a pretty good following, but theirs is not really on YouTube. It's on like Rumble and Spotify and stuff. And so they are a small channel on YouTube. I am a small channel on YouTube if we're going that route. And um even the Tennessee Conservative, like they said in their article, they got censored for something that they put out on election integrity. They have like 700, almost 800 followers or subscribers on YouTube, I mean. And I just think it's so interesting. I'm like, if these platforms, if YouTube was not threatened by the truth, why else would they be taking videos down when they're only reaching like 700, 800 people or less? Okay, that's not that many people in the grand scheme of things, right? So just it baffles my mind. You censored something on such a small channel that reaches such a small amount of people in comparison to your entire audience on your platform. It just kind of tells me that whatever was said was true and you didn't like it. That's what it says to me. But, I'm just a 20-year-old college dropout, so what do I know? Another thing that I found kind of amusing about this whole situation was like I didn't know that the episode got taken down, and then I think, like, last week, sometime I got an email from my boss, I guess, at the Tennessee Conservative, and he was like, "Hey, heads up, you're gonna be in the newspaper next week because the podcast you were on, the episode got taken down, so we're gonna write something up on it real quick." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. That's nice." And sure enough, the episodes on YouTube got taken down because we did the podcast as a live, and then he kind of took each section of what we talked about and he put them out as their own individual videos. And so both the live where we talked about all sorts of stuff that got taken down, and then the video that had the section in it where we talked about the vaccine and everything in Project Veritas, that got taken down. So two different videos got censored for the same thing for no reason except for that we were talking about something that you're not allowed to talk about. But the thing that was kind of entertaining to me was in the email where um, I found out that I was going to be in the news. He was like, also, he's like, congratulations, you've officially been censored by big tech. And I just thought it was so funny. I'm like, I feel like it's kind of become like a rite of passage now in conservative spheres to be censored by big social platforms and stuff. Actually, when I filled my parents in on the whole situation, I was like, yeah, our video got taken down because how dare we talk about specific issues. My dad was like, I am proud of you. And I was like, thank you. It doesn't take too terribly much for my parents to be proud of me, which is nice. But my father is proud of me for being censored by big tech, so I can die now. I guess I just think, okay, now hear me out. If somebody can do like an hour and a half long deep dive on the atrocity that is the Secret Life of the American Teenager TV show, okay, we should be able to discuss information that came straight from a certain pharmaceutical company's CEO about a certain vaccine for a certain virus. Like, I feel like we should be able to have that discussion. Also, you might be judging me right now for my choice in YouTube videos. In my defense, Sometimes I fall asleep watching YouTube and it has autoplay on my laptop, and I woke up one night at, like, 4 o'clock in the morning. I guess that's not night, but I woke up to that video playing, and it was just this random person doing, like, a deep dive on, like, the love triangles, or board or map or whatever of this TV show, and I was like, "So this is what we've come to." Luckily, you'll never have to put up with that from me, because I hate that show with a passion. But getting back to the topic at hand here, okay, the social media censorship prevention bill that the Tennessee Conservative article mentions is actually House Bill 682, and then the Senate version, I believe, is Senate Bill 111. And the bill, according to its summary, would pretty much, I'm going to go ahead and read a little blurb for you. It designates social media platforms as what we call common carriers, which would require them to obtain certificates of public convenience and necessity from the Tennessee Public Utilities Commission. This legislation would fine platforms for shadow banning users based on their political ideology, viewpoint, or personal animus, or for discrimination based on race, creed, color, sex, religion, age, or national origin. We actually talk about this same legislation in the Forge and Anvil episode, so if you want to hear a bit of discussion on what we all thought about this legislation, you can check out the episode. But pretty much my opinion is that I don't see this bill happening. I doubt it'll make it all the way through session, but that's just my personal opinion. I don't think you can really, like, control it because there's so many things that social media platforms, and bigger corporations get away with just based on the fact that they are a private business, and I just don't see this going the representative's way. Like, I don't think it's gonna make it very far, especially considering this is a state legislature, so this bill would only really be applicable to Tennessee as a state, trying to determine, like, who's in Tennessee and who's not in Tennessee, who can be protected from censorship and who can't, and it's like, well, if I'm a Tennessean and I go out of state and I make a post on a social media platform, does that mean that I'm not protected anymore? Or was it if I was born in Tennessee and I was raised in Tennessee and I just moved to California, am I still protected? Like, like, and I know those are, like, kind of stupid, like, scenario examples, but I'm just saying, like, it really doesn't make any sense. The bill's not gonna make it. It's just not realistic. And despite arguments about, well, they're a private business and whatever, and putting my own personal opinion on this specific legislation aside, I do think it's important to remember that when you are looking at legislation, you need to consider how it's going to be used. And not just how it's going to be used when your party is in power. Because, even in a conservative state like Tennessee, or South Dakota or Texas, where there tends to be some sort of Republican majority in the legislature. Okay, even when that is the case, you still need to consider how what you're putting into law could be used against you. That was kind of my perspective on the legislation that was proposed to turn more organizations, like advocacy organizations and stuff, into political action committees, pretty much. I did talk about that in a previous podcast episode, but that was pretty much my perspective on that. It's like, okay, well, yeah, you can argue that doing that can fight woke ideology or whatever the representative used in his little commentary on it. But at the same time, it's like, I personally need to consider what this would do, if it was used against me and used against my party, used against my belief system, and it doesn't look so good. And so, therefore, to me, as a conservative, it's not a good bill. Okay, even if it does something good for the Conservative Party or the Republican Party right now, what about in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years or a decade from now when whatever was put into law by us, okay, doesn't hold up the way it should and is used against you or used against us or whatever? Like, that just kind of is like a telltale sign of like a bill that's like maybe not a good idea. And I guess depending on whatever your own personal perspective or idea of what is appropriate for commentary or discussion or whatever in the public forum, whatever your opinion is on that, you might not see how the whole, consider how this could, be used against you argument. You might not see how that applies to this social media censorship protection bill. But I see it like this: there are some things that should be censored. There are some things that should not be consumed by people. And I think a lot of things that should not be consumed by people are permitted on social media already. And the thing is, if you pass a bill like this that protects people from being censored at all, pretty much based on any of these things that are listed in the bill, um, yes, that allows for conservatives to not be so smushed down by their beliefs, I guess. But at the same time, it pretty much okays certain things that the opposing side, I guess if we're gonna go with that, it pretty much condones certain things on the other side of things because they have the right to not be censored as well. And I mean, you can look at it like, well, they're not getting censored and they're not going to get censored. So, this is just a bill to protect conservatives because, regardless of what other people are saying and doing online, they're not the ones being censored. And you know what? It might be true, okay? There are things that conservatives say and do that liberals don't say and do, and vice versa. And I just think that no censorship is not the answer. Free speech is a good thing, and complete censorship is also not the answer. A very in depth and well explained, very conclusive conclusion, I know, that will in fact be my entire platform for my 2026 presidential campaign. And you might say, Adelia, you have to be like 40 something to run for president. Well, you know what? Not I. And you might be like, well, Adelia, there is no presidential election in 2026. And you know what? I was just trying to say something that made as much sense as this bill. That was a little bit harsh on the legislation. My apologies. I just think that if we get a little bit too caught up in the whole idea that nothing should be censored or nobody's opinion should be censored or whatever, that it kind of opens the door. It kind of, in a way, condones certain things that we do consume that we shouldn't be consuming. It condones opinions that aren't truthful, that, well, opinion isn't necessarily something that has to be factual, but I'm just saying, okay, like if we were to pass a bill like this, it does kind of condone everything that is currently on social media. Um, it does allow conservatives to speak more freely, but it would also condone everything else that is said, and I don't know if that really is the best thing either. Oh, also, here's another one for you, okay? What if, okay, this bill says social media platforms. It's talking about social media platforms. What if a conservative media platform pops up or a Christian social media platform pops up and gains popularity? It won't, because we've seen over the last couple of years a few conservative attempts at a social media platform, and regardless of the need for that space, um, there's kind of a few big corporations that are dominating. It's monopolizing, or whatever the big word is for that part of the market, and people just don't really test out new waters when it comes to that type of thing. They're used to Instagram, they're used to Facebook, they're used to Twitter, they're used to YouTube. This is all stuff that's been around for a hot minute now, and it's where people can gain followings very easily because that's where everybody is at. And so to try to introduce something new where there's not that many people, if you can't get like a crap ton of people on your platform, like right off the bat, it's not happening. But in theory, okay, if a somebody decided to put out a Christian social media app, okay, and it did gain a ton of popularity and there was a ton of people on it, What if an atheist came on and started just talking about atheism and talking about whatever and pitching things like it was truth and whatever? I don't know. I can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but you could kind of get what I'm saying, right? What if there was a situation in which um, something fell under their right to not be censored according to this legislation, but it did not fall under the idea of a Christian social media platform? Would the social media platform then be legally required to allow this person to speak whatever they're speaking on the app? Under this legislation, it certainly looks like it, and I just kind of think that that's a situation in which this could be used against you, and and you might sit there and be like, "Oh, well, that's not probable, or that's not likely, or maybe that will never happen." I mean, it won't because this bill is not going to pass. But I'm just saying, like, you have to consider these things when you're thinking about putting something into law. Anyways, it's been a long day. I'm slightly talked out, so this is going to be the end of this week's episode. However, I hope that you enjoyed my little synopsis of my recent endeavors and how I got censored for the first time. And maybe you even learned something new about the legislation that's being considered in Tennessee right now. I don't know when it's heading to committee exactly, but I think it's in the next week or two. And I will definitely be listening to those committee meetings because I'm interested to hear why they think that it's gonna pass, and then I want to know if they get any like backlash or any like friction from either other representatives or from like people outside, like from lobbyist groups or anything like that. Like I'm interested to see what the conversation around this bill is. So I will be keeping up with that. Don't know if there will be a story in it, but we will see. If you by chance enjoyed this episode of Subtle Rampage, um I hope that you will consider giving me a little bit of an ego boost, maybe like the YouTube video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I do appreciate you. Keep it up. Anyways, you can follow the podcast on social media at Subtle Rampage Podcast. It's on Instagram and Facebook to keep up with weekly episode postings and sometimes other things. I don't know. I'm not a social media person. I'm really bad at it, but I do try. And I will see you back here next week with another episode of Subtle Rampage.